There were male actors I was once very close to, almost like only we understood each other, but then they turned their backs, leaving me in loneliness and secrets I could never speak aloud.
Gary Cooper once revealed a list of 7 gay actors he had secretly dated. Men who in the end became the ones he despised the most. In October 2004, the Los Angeles Times shocked the public by publishing a diary believed to have belonged to Gary Cooper. Inside were not recollections of his career or the glory of the silver screen, but rather a list of 7 men with whom he had shared secret romantic relationships, and who later on he claimed to loathe to the core. Cooper wrote, "Some people kill you with a gun, some kill you with silence. But these men, they strangled me with love until I could barely breathe." So who were the men Gary Cooper hated for the rest of his life? And how exactly did their love destroy him? The answers are about to be revealed. Gary Cooper, the man with perhaps the calmest face ever to grace the silver screen, was once hailed as the embodiment of the American ideal and stood as one of the towering icons of 20th century Hollywood. With his pensive gaze, steady voice, and inimitable demeanor, he convinced the world that he was the most trustworthy man ever to step onto the screen. From the outside, Cooper's 1933 marriage to Veronica Balfe looked like a flawlessly scripted fairy tale, America's top movie star marrying a distinguished New York socialite. A formal ceremony at St. Bartholomew's Church. Their wedding photo gracing the cover of Life magazine, accompanied by glowing praise, calling it Hollywood's ideal marriage. But years later, leaked notes from the Balfe family's lawyer revealed the truth the marriage had been a calculated arrangement built on image religion and power. Cooper, who at the time was grappling with rumors about his sexuality, needed a public facade. Veronica, a smart and well-connected woman, agreed in exchange for lifelong financial security. Just 6 months after the wedding, according to records from Lloyd's of London Insurance Office, Cooper was discovered spending the night at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel with a Broadway male dancer. Veronica knew but never confronted him. She quietly documented everything, keeping every receipt, and resigned herself to a marriage where the two lived merely as shadows beside each other. By 1949, Cooper openly had an affair with actress Patricia Neal, while continuing to secretly date at least 2 other male actors, according to former private investigator Fred Otosh. The press remained silent, but within Hollywood's inner circles, whispers began that marriage was never real. Perhaps it was the abundance of falsehoods in his private life that drove Cooper to write everything down, the words never spoken aloud, the loves that could never be named. And among those names was one man who had once sworn to love him forever, but was the first to turn away, deny him, and cast him into the pit of media scandal: Cary Grant. 1. Cary Grant, the tyrant behind the curtain. Cary Grant was like a double-edged blade, polished and charming on the surface, sharp and cutting beneath. Hollywood adored him for his eyes that seemed to smile, his refined grin, and his mix of British gentlemanly grace and roguish charm. Gary Cooper loved him for the hidden sides no one else had ever seen. And that was the greatest mistake of Cooper's life. In late 1937, they met at a private film screening hosted at director George Cukor's home in Beverly Hills. It wasn't the first time the 2 stars had crossed paths, but it was the first time they spoke long enough to lose track of time. Cary's gaze was intense, commanding. Gary kept his usual distance. Yet in that cramped room with no prying eyes, the distance simply melted away. Just a week later, they rented a small house together in Silver Lake at the end of Hyperion Avenue, far from the attention of paparazzi. The lease was signed under the name of Murray Winters, Cary's personal secretary. By day, they were 2 stars from 2 different worlds. By night, they were 2 men living as their true selves, quietly loving each other behind closed curtains. Veronica, Gary's wife, continued to appear at his side at public events. But she no longer asked where he went, why he returned home late, or who he was with. In a letter to her close friend, Annabelle Knox in New York, now kept at Columbia Library, she wrote, "Gary is still gentle, but he's no longer mine. I don't know who owns that look in his eyes now, but it certainly isn't me." Their love lasted in secret for over a year until one fateful night in August 1939 when it all came crashing down. While Gary was filming The Westerner in Arizona, the Los Angeles Examiner suddenly ran a front-page exclusive, "Gary Cooper in Affair with Unnamed Male Figure Paramount Scandal Erupts." There were no photographs, no names yet. The details in the article matched alarmingly well the La Quinta Hotel, the 1937 Packard, the house in Silver Lake. Every point was accurate to the letter. Gary panicked, calling Cary in the middle of the night for comfort. But instead of reassurance, he was met with an icy voice. "I don't know what you're talking about. You think I'd throw away my career over something this unreliable? If you want to fall, don't drag me down with you." Weeks later, Cary Grant gave a lengthy interview to columnist Luella Parsons of the Hearst Syndicate, bluntly stating, "I pity those who can't control their private lives. I'm different. I've always known the line between reality and performance." It wasn't until 1979 that Philip G. Ross, a former Examiner editor, revealed in his memoir, Deadline Confidential, "We got an anonymous tip from someone inside giving us every detail of Cooper's relationship with an A-list actor in exchange for $12,000. I can't name names, but he was once called Hollywood's #1 gentleman from Bristol." The article nearly destroyed Gary and Veronica's marriage. She left for New York for 3 months, leaving their daughter Maria behind in Los Angeles. Gary barely left the house. In an unsent letter scrawled in black ink, he wrote, "You didn't kill me with words, Cary. You killed me with the silence that followed. I lost my family, my self-respect, because I believed you thought this was real too. But it turns out, you were just acting." In the list found inside a trunk in Montana, Cooper never wrote his name. There was only a single line, the traitor. "My first lover. The man who sold my soul for 3 lines of newsprint." But Cary was only the prelude. The next name on that list was the true addiction in Gary's love life, a man who stayed but never committed, who was closest when he seemed farthest away. And in the end, it was Gary himself who had to cut the cord that bound them. 2. Rock Hudson, the sweetest lover and the most subtle manipulator I ever knew. If Cary Grant stabbed Gary Cooper in front of the entire nation, Rock Hudson slipped poison into his glass and made him drink it, smiling gently all the while. They met in late 1949 at a secret casting session at Universal Studios. Rock was in his early 20s then, with no major roles, living on money sent from his mother in Illinois, and a 6-month Class C contract. But Gary saw in Rock something he had never seen in Cary, pure adoration. "You're the reason I dared to come to Hollywood," Rock said that very first day. "I even learned how to ride a horse just so I could play cowboys like you." That line Gary would later call the sentence that killed me, because from that moment on he began protecting Rock as if he were a child, or more accurately, a lover who would never grow up. They soon moved in together, renting a house in West Hollywood under the name of Gary's personal assistant. Rock stayed there for nearly 3 years, from 1950 to mid-1953. Few knew that during that time, Rock Hudson became the only person who could make Gary both deeply in love and profoundly doubt himself. Gary believed he was the one in control of the relationship, but he wasn't. Rock controlled him in ways too sweet to be called manipulation and too gentle for Gary to resist. In 1952, Rock began turning down small roles. "I can't keep playing these khaki pants policemen," he told Gary. "I want to be recognized like you." Gary, hopelessly in love, personally phoned director Henry Hathaway to request that Rock be given a casting opportunity for Niagara. Though the role eventually went to Joseph Cotten, Rock knew Gary would do anything to keep him close. By 1953, Rock had landed his first leading role in Magnificent Obsession, a major turning point. But before filming began over drinks one night, he told Gary, "They want me clean. Clean in image, clean in relationships. If the rumors spread, I'll be finished before I'm famous." You know that, but it didn't stop there. To protect his career, Rock quietly spread rumors that Gary Cooper was mentally unstable and violent at home. At a Beverly Hills party in early 1954, Rock half-joked to gossip columnist Hedda Hopper, "Gary has two moods, silent as a statue or smashing things. I once saw him throw a typewriter over a single bad line of dialogue." A week later, The Hollywood Reporter ran the headline, "Is the Cowboy Cracking Sources? Say Cooper exhibits erratic behavior." Gary was bewildered. Worse still, he discovered that bottles of Seconal sleeping pills in his house had been tampered with. He once told his personal doctor, "I don't remember taking that many. But I'm starting to lose track of what's day and what's night." Rumors, reportedly from Rock's former secretary, claimed that Rock would slip extra doses into Gary's drinks to keep him close. Keep him calm, keep him from asking questions. A form of love that was possessive, sweet, and dangerous all at once. Then, in November 1955, Rock Hudson suddenly married Phyllis Gates, his agent's secretary, in a staged wedding. Gary received no explanation. A week later, Rock appeared on The Steve Allen Show. Speaking tearfully, "I grew up in poverty. I always dreamed of having a real family. I'm lucky to have found a woman who loves me for who I am, not for the movies." The nation was moved. But Gary knew it was just a performance to erase him from Rock's life. If Rock Hudson left Gary lost and without trust, the third man was different. This man made Gary believe he could abandon his family and career just to live honestly for once. But the price of that trust was complete ruin. 3. Anthony Perkins, an execution by love. Anthony Perkins once said on KABC TV that he grew up with the image of Gary Cooper on the silver screen. But few knew that at their very first meeting at the Fear Strikes Out premiere in November 1957 at Westwood Village, the young man's gaze at Gary was nothing like that of an ordinary fan. It was the gaze of a devotee who had just found a living saint and was already preparing to pull him from the throne. Anthony's first letters to Gary carried an innocent tone. "If the day comes when I no longer hear the applause, will you still call my name?" But according to Walter Ames, Cooper's personal assistant, only a few months later, Perkins was a regular visitor to the discreet Santa Monica apartment where Gary hid from the spotlight, cooking breakfast, reading books, and loving as if he had never known heartbreak. Gary believed he was entering a new chapter, gentle, safe. But he didn't realize he had stepped into a maze with no way out. Anthony had a habit of bringing up powerful Hollywood figures. Director Otto Preminger, producer Hal Wallace, and each time Gary stayed silent, not wanting to stand in the way of his lover's ambitions. Yet he began to feel uneasy as late-night parties became more frequent, as private meetings on Mulholland Drive took place without his clear consent. Whenever Gary declined to attend, Anthony would simply smile and vanish for the night, returning the next morning with lifeless eyes and the faint scent of alcohol on his collar. Worse still, Anthony began pulling Gary into psychological traps, sending anonymous letters to columnist Luella Parsons about mild psychosis in a veteran star prone to violence when jealous, pressuring Gary to handwrite letters, then retyping them himself and accidentally leaving them behind in the Warner Brothers dressing rooms. By early 1959, forged letters, spliced audio recordings, and even lost diary pages began arriving in anonymous envelopes to writers like Hedda Hopper, Jimmy Starr, and Motion Picture Herald. In them, Gary was painted as controlling, domineering, and sexually fixated on younger men. One excerpt sent Variety's newsroom into a frenzy. "He's not just the most beautiful role I've ever played. He's how I survive. If he leaves me, I'd rather die." Gary had never written those words. But every period, every line break, even the typewriter's print matched his own. Anthony had copied him perfectly. The breaking point came in March 1960, just weeks before Psycho's premiere. Gary was accused by an anonymous reporter of suffering a serious psychological breakdown and having once threatened suicide after being abandoned by a younger co-star. Producers of The Wreck of the Mary Deer immediately removed him from their fall casting slate. Even Paramount began wavering on renewing his next 5-year contract. One evening at Musso and Frank, Gary ran into Anthony. He asked just one question. "Did you ever really love me? Or was it all just one long scene?" Anthony merely smiled, offering no answer. And in that moment, Gary understood sometimes you don't need a gun to kill someone. All you need is love long enough and cold enough. 4. Randolph Scott, the hidden rival behind the perfect lover's mask. The next name on the list was Randolph Scott. At first glance, Randolph embodied Hollywood's ideal man. Tall, elegant, soft-spoken, always appearing in a crisply pressed white shirt with a rare but disarming smile. Yet what Gary didn't know was that beneath that composure lay a disturbing habit, collecting people the way one collects scripts, systematically, meticulously, and without leaving a trace. They first met in 1940 during a screen test for They Died with Their Boots On at Warner Brothers. Neither man got the part, but as they left the casting room, Randolph turned back his tone, half mocking, half provocative. "We're better suited to be failures together than winners alone." Gary laughed. Perhaps that line planted the seed. He saw in Randolph a man both similar to himself and completely opposite. Randolph was unlike anyone who had entered Gary's life before. No noise, no control, no questions. At least not at first. 3 months later, Gary moved in with Randolph at a secluded Silver Lake estate in Los Angeles. In the beginning, it was a dreamlike existence, shielded from the glare of the press. They cooked together, played tennis, read scripts, and wrote imaginary dialogue they never intended to perform. But the last peaceful night ended when Gary awoke at 3 a.m. to a faint clattering in the wardrobe. It wasn't a mouse. It was the hum of a running tape recorder. From that night on, everything changed. Randolph began to know too much. Even things Gary had never spoken aloud. Like the time he sat alone on the porch steps, typing idly on the royal typewriter Randolph had given him. "I wish he could hurt the way I do." Later, Gary discovered that the typewriter had been fitted with a tracking device and special carbon paper. Every line he typed had a duplicate copy. Every sentence, every period, every flicker of doubt was preserved as if waiting to be performed on stage. In 1944, Randolph released Under the Floorboards, a dark psychological drama about a young actor lost in delusion. In love with a powerful man, ultimately self-destructing when he could no longer tell real love from manipulation. The film won the Golden Globe for Best Original Screenplay. But the man sitting silently in a private screening room, sleeves rolled up to hide a trembling arm, was the very man the story was based on. Gary Cooper. Every line of dialogue, every letter, every private memory had been used without permission. No thanks, no acknowledgement, not even his name. When the film's protagonist knelt in the middle of the room, looked up at his lover and said, "If I'm wrong, please rewrite me," as another line of dialogue. Cary stood up and walked out. He never spoke of it again. Afterward, Cary disappeared from Los Angeles for a long stretch. It wasn't until 1947, when he reappeared on the set of Unconquered, that people noticed his eyes had changed. They were no longer clear as before. Few knew that the first person to call him after all those lost months was a man with a sorrowful smile who had twice nearly died mixing liquor with sleeping pills, and who had once loved Cary like the last flame in a burning desert. His name was Montgomery Clift. 5. Montgomery Clift, the mirror that broke but never healed. Cary once whispered to co-star Joel McCrea, "Monty loves with his whole body, but hates with his whole mind." And I never know which side I'm on. They met in the spring of 1951 at a private party hosted by director George Cukor. At the time, Cary was still struggling to free himself from the shadow named Cary Grant, while Montgomery Clift had just been dubbed by Life magazine as Marlon Brando's most dangerous successor. Monty saw Cary from across the room. Back straight, shoulders relaxed, eyes still and deep like water, just before it breaks into waves, and said only one thing before approaching. "I know that look. It used to live in the mirror in my room." 2 weeks later, Cary left his Wilshire apartment to live with Monty in a secluded villa hidden in the pines of Big Sur. No phone lines, no neighbors, no way out. Monty called it a healing retreat, but to Cary, it became a living psychological laboratory where he was no longer a man, but a subject under emotional dissection. Monty demanded all outside contact be cut. He personally burned Cary's address book in the fireplace, unplugged the house phone, and ordered the staff to take instructions only from handwritten notes signed by him. At night, they dined in silence. Afterwards, Monty would project Cary's old films, Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, Sergeant York the Westerner, on a 16mm projector in the center of the room, sitting behind Cary and whispering like a hypnotist, "Tell me, do you love the man on that screen? Or are you just replaying a dream that never was?" At first it was a question, then a request, and finally a command. When Cary resisted, Monty didn't shout, didn't smash things. He simply played a recording Cary's voice speaking of loneliness, fear, and moments when he wished to disappear. Monty had captured it by planting a recording device in the old typewriter Cary had brought with him. His most private monologues had been stolen. During arguments, Monty would force Cary to kneel before a massive mirror in the living room, a 30-kilogram silver-framed piece custom-made in Italy, and read aloud a script Monty had written. "Who am I, if not loved by a man like you?" Every word clearly, without omission. One night, Cary tried to leave. He packed his bags quietly at 2 a.m., but when he opened the suitcase, a small device inside began playing Monty's recorded voice steady and cold. "If you walk out, every role you play from now on will be nothing but an empty shadow." Cary didn't leave. He didn't smash the recorder. He simply stood in the dark until morning. 6 months in Big Sur passed like a slow-motion descent. When William Holden finally found him and brought him back to Los Angeles, Cary was 24 pounds lighter, his eyes hollow, and he spoke only one sentence during the entire drive from Big Sur to Hollywood. "I no longer know who I'm living inside, or who's living inside me." Monty denied everything. In Modern Screen, he vaguely remarked, "Sometimes people confuse loving with keeping. I've never made that mistake." In the notebook Cary left behind, one page stood out, written in red ink, "I once loved a mirror, but I made the mistake." of throwing it to the ground. That mirror, though shattered, had once reflected the truest parts of Cary Cooper. But fate wasn't done with him. As Cary tried to start over, keeping his distance from those who had broken him, Hollywood brought him yet another face, radiant, dazzling, but with eyes that always hid something. 6. Tab Hunter, the sweet trap in a cold winter. If there was ever someone who made Cary Cooper believe he could love again wholly without defenses, it was Tab Hunter, the young actor with clear eyes and scratches hidden behind his smile. They saw each other again in February 1957, backstage at the Love Me Tender premiere. They had first crossed paths at a small Universal party, but that night, when the 25-year-old's gaze met the man who had long been acquainted with silence, neither of them walked away the same. I used to wish that if anyone could teach me how to live in this world without feeling ashamed of myself, it would be you. Tab whispered one cold afternoon in Griffith Park as they rode horses along the hills. Cary didn't respond immediately, but from that day on he began sending handwritten letters praising Tab's performance in The Steel Lady, introducing him to director Henry Levin, and quietly shielding him from the backstage whispers about his sexuality rumors that could incinerate a career in a single night. Their affection grew like a small, unseen cut. No one noticed, except Veronica. She didn't ask questions, but she began sleeping in a separate room. By June 1957, Cary would leave the house on Thursday evenings, claiming to be working on a script at a rented house in Manhattan Beach. In truth, it was their meeting place where Tab always arrived, first turned on the warm yellow lamp and left a handwritten note. I don't need anything. I just need to see you not playing Cooper anymore. But Tab's love was not the love of a grown man. It was young, impulsive, and always afraid of being abandoned. He once called Cary a dozen times in one night after seeing him brush shoulders with Van Heflin at a script reading. On another occasion, he left a hastily written note in Cary's glove compartment in red ink. If one day you disappear without a word, then I'll disappear from your life too. But in a way, you'll never forget. Cary wasn't angry, only sad. Because more than anyone he knew, Tab didn't love him as a man, but as a dream in need of a place to survive. Then one November evening in 1957, Cary arrived at the beach house as usual. But the light was off. There was no handwritten note. The kitchen had been cold for some time. 3 days later, Photoplay ran its front page, Tab Hunter, engaged to actress Linda Peterson, screen idol finds happiness. No one asked about Cary. No one mentioned those quiet Thursday nights. Cary didn't ask either. He simply looked at the headline, folded the paper, and placed it in a drawer he would never open again. Veronica, his wife, left a single note on the dining table. If I'm not the last to know about this, then at least I'll be the first to end it. Cary didn't argue. He left Los Angeles for 3 months. Director George Stevens later recalled seeing him one winter night sitting alone in the garden behind the Bel Air Hotel's sunglasses and holding a folded yellowed piece of paper. No one knew what was written on it. All they knew was that after that night, Cary Cooper never spoke Tab Hunter's name again. 7. James Dean, a love story, ending in a mysterious accident. In 1954, Cary Cooper entered the emptiest phase of his life. His marriage was a formality. His career had stalled. Former lovers had betrayed or manipulated him. And then James Dean appeared. They didn't meet in Hollywood, but in a small cafe on McDougal Street in Greenwich Village, New York. Dean was rehearsing a play with Elia Kazan. Cary was attending an old gathering of his 1930s film friends. No one had invited Dean. He came out of curiosity. But when he caught Cary's gaze, he gave a faint smile. I never thought my idol in real life could look this sad." Cary didn't answer, but for the rest of the evening, his eyes never left the 23-year-old in the corner sketching on a napkin while sipping black coffee. Within a week, they were meeting regularly, at first for walks in Central Park, then for long, aimless drives. Dean behind the wheel, Cary resting his head against the window, letting the wind rush through his hair, feeling lighter than he had in years. James Dean was unlike anyone else. He didn't want fame. He didn't need protection. He only wanted Cary present in every smallest moment. And Cary, a man who had spent his life playing ideal roles, suddenly felt like a young boy again in his presence. In late August 1955, while staying near the Joshua Tree Desert, Dean whispered, "If I came out, would you be afraid?" Cary stayed silent for a long time before replying, "I'm only afraid. I wouldn't have the courage to go all the way with you." They arranged a secret interview with journalist Lyle Curtin, who had once turned down millions to protect Rock Hudson's secret on October 10, 1955, in a discreet Burbank apartment. The topic, an honest account of a love without a name. That day never came. On September 30th, 1955, James Dean was killed on Route 466 while driving his Porsche 550 Spider to Salinas. Officially, it was a high-speed collision. But years later, the chief mechanic at Little Bastard, the shop that serviced the car, let slip over drinks that Porsche never got its new brakes installed. The person who ordered the work said, "Don't bother replacing them." Signed someone from Gary Cooper's camp. It was never confirmed. Cary disappeared from the public eye for nearly a year. He was only seen again at St. Ignatius Church in San Francisco on Dean's next birthday, wearing a black hat and standing for a long time before the statue of St. John. After Cary Cooper's death in 1973, a wooden box was found in his Montana home. Inside was a reel of tape. Dean's voice trembling slightly, speaking slowly. "If one day everything disappears, don't remember me as a star. Remember me as the boy who wanted you to love without fearing anything." And Cary never loved again. The chest had been opened. But perhaps the most painful thing wasn't the 7 names. It was the silence that remained after them. Had Cary Cooper ever truly been loved? Or was he only a stand-in for desires no one dared to admit? Did he simply love the wrong people? Or had no one in his entire life ever taught him what it meant to be loved the right way? If what you've just read leaves you silent for a moment, questioning the truths behind Golden Age Hollywood, share your thoughts.